Well, good afternoon, everyone. Apologies again for the technical difficulties, but a very warm welcome to this online meeting of the Socialist Equality Party, the Blairites' anti-Semitism witch hunt, and the failure of Corbynism. My name's Thomas Scripps. I'm the Assistant National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party in the UK, and I will be chairing the event today. The SEP has called this meeting following Corbyn's suspension from the Labour Party to explain the immense political ramifications of the anti-Semitism witch hunt, and to discuss how it is that after 5 years or so of his leadership, Labour remains in the hands of the right wing, and the national government is in the hands of Boris Johnson and his cabinet of reactionaries. More than that, we want to draw out the political lessons of these events and make an argument for the independent socialist political leadership that has to be constructed to confront the immense dangers now faced by the working class in this period, not least Labour's own anti-Semitism campaign. The pandemic catastrophe and the US elections crisis make clear that capitalism is rotting on its feet, and that the central political question today is the formation of a revolutionary party that can lead the working class to power and carry out a socialist reconstruction of society. Chris Marsden, with me today, the National Secretary of the SEP UK and a member of the World Socialist website's International Editorial Board, will deliver some opening remarks on these questions in just a moment. After that, we want this meeting to include as much discussion as possible. There are hundreds of questions around these issues, and for those who are serious about building an independent socialist party of the working class, this is the place you will find serious answers. So I encourage you, while Chris is speaking or immediately afterwards, please post your questions to us both in the comments section, and we can start to engage in a dialogue on some of these questions. We've already had a few sent in ahead of the meeting, which we will try to get to as well in the course of the discussion. I'd like to hand over now to Chris to make his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, comrades, and hello everyone and welcome. And many of those listening today will know a great deal about the immediate events leading up to the suspension of former leader Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party, and may also be aware of what's followed in terms of others being victimised. You would not be here if that were not the case. But with apologies, I'll begin by briefly reviewing these events. On October the 29th, a report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission was released, claiming, quote, serious failings in the Labour Party leadership in addressing anti-Semitism and an inadequate process for handling anti-Semitism complaints. A few hours after its release, Corbyn issued a defence of his record in opposing anti-Semitism, stating that the scale of the problem within the Labour Party was, quote, dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party, as well as by much of the media. Within 2 hours, Corbyn was suspended from a party he's been a member of for over half a century by new party leader Sir Keir Starmer. Then asked on BBC's Today programme if Corbyn could be expelled, Starmer said, yes, people have been expelled from the Labour Party, adding that hundreds of Labour members had already been expelled since he replaced Corbyn in April. Now, this will not end with Corbyn. The next step by Labour was to lay down the basis for expelling anyone who criticised the EHRC report or who even tried to defend Corbyn. Guidance to constituency Labour parties from General Secretary Dave Evans states, quote, social media accounts of branches, CLPs, and other party units should not be used to comment on the EHRC investigation or the publication of its report. Another guidance document from Evans warned the party has accepted the recommendations in full, consequently motions from CLPs or branches that seek to question the competence of the EHRC to conduct the investigation in any way or repudiate or reject the report or any of its recommendations are not competent business and must be ruled out of order. The witch hunting of members is being intensified by an online dragnet of members' comments. The Squawk Box blog made public a document from the party leadership to officials which states, quote, "If you see any members who you believe may have broken the party's rules with what they've posted on social media, whether that be on anti-Semitism, the independence of the EHRC, or reducing the EHRC's report to smears, staff can submit evidence here." On Friday, Bristol West CLP, which had voted to condemn the treatment of Corbyn as, quote, "a politically motivated attack against the left of the Labour Party by the leadership," had its chair and one of its co-secretaries suspended for the crime of allowing the motion to even be debated. Now, these are politically outrageous, even illegal acts. The EHRC, in whose defence Starmer purports to act, feels obliged to reference in its own witch-hunting report protections of free speech and political comment afforded under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. It states in bulleted points, "Speech does not lose the protection of Article 10 just because it is offensive, provocative, or would be regarded by some as insulting. Statements made by elected politicians have enhanced protection under Article 10. Relevant factors will include whether speech is intended to inform rather than offend, whether it forms part of an ongoing debate of public interest, and whether it consists of alleged statements of fact or of value judgment. We also take into account how far the speech or conduct interferes with the rights of others and the severity of impact of any measures that we might propose to take in respect of it." And then it says, specifically, Article 10 will protect Labour Party members who, for example, make legitimate criticisms of the Israeli government or express their opinion on internal party matters, such as the scale of anti-Semitism within the party, based on their own experience and within the law. Now, this is politically devastating for Starmer, the former lawyer and Director of Public Prosecutions, but it will not give him a moment's pause. Now, despite our fundamental political differences, the Socialist Equality Party condemned the action taken against Corbyn immediately, writing in a World Socialist website perspective the next day of a, quote, "vicious and anti-democratic action by the right-wing cabal in control of the Labour Party." We wrote, "The political pretext on which the suspension was carried out, claiming the existence of widespread left anti-Semitism in the Labour Party under his leadership, is a slander not only against Corbyn, but of countless party members. It is a political witch hunt designed to justify the enforcement of the policies of British and US imperialism in the Middle East, built around the dishonest and illegitimate identification of anti-Semitism with principled opposition to the policies of the Israeli state." We also made the crucial observation, and again I quote, "The level of cynicism involved beggars belief. Anti-Semitism, racial hatred directed towards the Jews, is historically identified with the far right, especially with Nazi Germany, though it had many adherents within the British ruling class, including among the royal family. Now the left is being targeted as the source of anti-Semitism, even as the fascist alternative for Germany has been elevated to the position of official opposition in the Bundestag, and similar formations, including Marine Le Pen's National Rally in France, are being cultivated by the ruling elite throughout Europe. Left unchallenged, it will have a chilling effect on democratic rights, including the right to free speech and the right of political parties to advance policies that are deemed illegitimate by an unaccountable cabal of state operatives and political scoundrels. The ultimate target of this McCarthyite orgy is the working class, which will face censorship, political victimization, and even criminal prosecutions for opposing imperialism's crimes internationally and at home. The SEP made clear that the aim of the Blairites in driving out Labour's left-leaning rank and file was to make sure that Labour would act in future as a reliable instrument of the most reactionary elements within the British state apparatus. But before addressing this, I want to explain in more detail the fundamental and truly international issues at stake in the fight against the witch hunt and the forces leading the left anti-Semitism slander campaign. The broader aim of this offensive, politically led by an alliance of Blairites, Zionists and Tories, all with intimate connections to the security services of Britain, the US and Israel, is not only to prohibit criticism of Israel's repression of the Palestinians, though this alone makes this struggle a fundamental one. Israel, after all, plays a key strategic role for US, British and world imperialism in the Middle East, sitting at the hub of a network of capitalist states that collectively police the oil-rich region, ensuring global fuel supplies while suppressing the region's working classes. Whipping up religious, communal and ethnic divisions when this suits them, and even waging wars to determine regional hegemony, they all come together when it's a case of repressing popular opposition, as evidence in the close alliance being forged between Israel and Egypt against the Palestinians, and the recent normalization agreement signed by the Netanyahu government with Qatar and Sudan, and with more to follow, likely including Saudi Arabia. Moreover, it must be stressed that they do so at Washington's command. The EHRC investigation itself was announced in June 2019. That same month, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo lifted the veil on plans to prevent a Corbyn-led Labour government from coming to power in Britain in the then upcoming general election. At a conference of presidents of major American Jewish organizations, he was asked if Corbyn, quote, is elected, would you be willing to work with us to take on actions if life becomes very difficult for Jews in the UK? Pompeo replied, it could be that Mr. Corbyn manages to run the gauntlet and get elected. It's possible. You should know we won't wait for him to do those things to begin to push back. We will do our level best. It's too risky and too important and too hard once it's already happened. It is impossible to wage a struggle against imperialist warmongering and to fight for the unity of the working class of the Middle East while accepting the political restrictions being demanded in the name of combating left anti-Semitism. It would leave Jewish workers under the control of the Zionist state, and politicians and Arab workers prey to the claims of bourgeois Islamist groups, Sunni and Shia, to represent the anti-imperialist strivings of the region's workers and oppressed masses. But this points to the most fundamental aim of the left anti-Semitism lie machine, to denigrate and discredit socialism by associating with hatred of the Jews while concealing the real threat posed by the far right. Now, when the first phase of this campaign was in full swing, I wrote an article centered on a column by Roger Cohen of the New York Times titled Anti-Semitic Anti-Zionism. The SEP had been warning for months that the accusations levelled against Corbyn and his supporters were a calumny against hundreds of thousands of progressive and anti-racist working people in order to place the Labour Party under the firm control of its pro-NATO, pro-business, right-wing, and to outlaw all criticism of the state of Israel and Zionism. But I also explained, and I quote, its broader purpose, however, is made clear in the very first line. Quote, the hard left meeting the hard right is an old political story, as Hitler understood in calling his party the National Socialists. I replied, Cohen's old political story is an old political lie. Nazism was developed not primarily as an anti-Semitic, but as an anti-communist movement. Anti-Marxism and opposition to the international unification of the working class was Hitler's driving obsession, to which he counterposed ethnic German nationalism. His hatred of the Jews was based upon their association with the socialist movement. He stated in Mein Kampf that his aim was to destroy Jewish Bolshevism. He wrote of his conviction that, quote, "The question of the future of the German nation is the question of the destruction of Marxism. In Russian Bolshevism, we must see the attempt undertaken by the Jews in the 20th century to achieve world domination." I then continued, "The service provided to German imperialism by National Socialism, i.e. fascism, was to mobilize the ruined petty bourgeoisie and the D-class lumpen proletariat as a shock force against the organized workers' movement. Its essential political aim was to eradicate Marxian socialism and destroy the labour movement as a precondition for the unleashing of militarism and war, which were necessary to secure the markets and territory required by German imperialism, as expressed in Hitler's goal of Lebensraum, living space in the East." Now, as for the socialist movement, that is the Marxist movement, it's attracted so many Jewish workers intellectuals precisely because it stood resolutely for internationalism, for equality and unity, and an end to all forms of ethnic or religious discrimination, including opposition to the anti-Semitism espoused by all of Europe's bourgeois governments. What the Zionists and their right-wing allies are undertaking is a grotesque and potentially devastating distortion of history. Think about its implications for a moment. At a meeting in London in March 2019, the World Socialist website's editor-in-chief, David North, explained, and I quote, "What is involved in this attack on Corbyn and his supporters in the Labour Party entails such a vicious falsification of history and such a distortion of reality that it has served to undermine the ability to conduct a struggle against fascism and anti-Semitism where it really exists. The Zionists, Blairites and Tories, in pursuit of the most reactionary political goals, are intent on drawing an equal sign between the far left and far right when 6 million Jews perished at the hands of the Nazis, and under conditions where the far right is once again re-emerging as a significant political force, both in Europe and internationally. In his anti-Semitism, fascism and the Holocaust, a critical review of Daniel Goldhagen's Hitler's Willing Executioners, which should be read by everyone, North explains the real historic struggle waged by the socialist movement in Germany against anti-Semitism. Here is a brief passage. The history of the German social democracy, in the years when it represented a revolutionary mass movement of the working class, that is from the 1870s to the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, is one of unrelenting struggle against anti-Semitism. The exigencies of the political struggle in the working class required an intransigent attitude towards all forms of anti-Semitic propaganda. Aside from democratic principles and moral considerations, the Social Democratic Party saw the association of anti-Semitism with demagogic anti-capitalist rhetoric as an attempt to disorient the working class and subordinate it to the political representatives of the middle class. The formation by Adolf Stoecker of his explicitly anti-Semitic Christian Social Workers' Party sought to use Jew baiting as a means of winning the working class away from the increasingly influential, albeit illegal, social democracy. In opposition to Stoecker, the social democracy waged a powerful campaign to educate the working class as to the reactionary nature of anti-Semitism. The counter-offensive of the SPD exerted immense political and moral influence over the working class. Anti-Semitic rallies were broken up by workers and Stoecker was jeered. The opposition of the SDP to anti-Semitism found a powerful symbol in its selection of a Jewish socialist businessman, Paul Singer, as its candidate for the Reichstag, the parliament, in an important Berlin district. In the elections of 1887, Singer received more votes than any other candidate in the city. Opposition to anti-Semitism, writes the historian Wistrich, had become a badge of honour for the workers' movement. Now, there's not the space here to do justice to the fundamental struggle waged by the founder of our own movement, Leon Trotsky, against the fascist danger. Trotsky's central aim in the early 1930s was to change the course of the German Communist Party in order to stop the rise of National Socialism and prevent Hitler's victory. The KPD, under Stalinist leadership, refused to make any distinction between fascism and social democracy, which it labelled social fascism, and rejected the policy of the United Front developed by the initial congresses of the Comintern under the leadership of Lenin. Trotsky wrote constantly warning against this ultra-left policy. In the article for a Workers' United Front Against Fascism, Trotsky explained, "The thousands upon thousands of Noskers, Welsers and Hilferdings," referring to leaders of the SDP, "prefer in the last analysis fascism to communism. But for that they must once and for all tear themselves loose from the workers. Today this is not yet the case. Today the social democracy as a whole, with all its internal antagonisms, is forced into sharp conflict with the fascists. It is our task to take advantage of this conflict and not to unite the antagonists against us. The front must now be directed against fascism, and this common front of direct struggle against fascism, embracing the entire proletariat, must be utilised in the struggle against the social democracy, directed as a flank attack, but no less effective for all that." By rejecting a united front with the SPD, by delivering ultimatum after ultimatum to the SPD, and in some instances working with the Nazis against the SPD, the Communist Party pushed the social democratic workers, who were highly critical of their leaders, back into their arms. It paralysed the working class, demoralised its own members, and strengthened the fascists. This allowed Hitler to come to power without a shot fired. Trotsky then waited to see if any section of the Communist International would react to the German catastrophe and criticise the Stalinist bureaucratic clique leading the Comintern. When this did not happen, he wrote, "An organisation which was not roused by the thunder of fascism and which submits docilely to such outrageous acts of the bureaucracy demonstrates thereby that it is dead and that nothing can ever revive it." The conclusion he drew from this was that it was necessary to build the Fourth International, which was founded in 1938. Ultimately, the left anti-Semitism campaign is directed at concealing these essential historical realities and preventing the emergence of a mass international socialist movement of the working class against capitalism. Now, Cohen's column, and so many others like it, did so by seeking to identify the hard left with the hard right as advocates of what he described as, quote, the British political theorist Alan Johnson has called anti-Semitic anti-Zionism. Now let me explain the origins of this theory, which does not begin with Mr. Johnson. The discovery of a supposedly new form of anti-Semitism was made in order to shield Israel from international opposition to its displacement and then repression of the Palestinians, especially after the 1967 war, which naturally came from the left, but which also found mass expression among the Arab peoples in the Middle East. The theory developed with a large input from various governments and state institutions in Israel was that the left and the Muslim populations of the world had either joined with or even eclipsed the far right as a danger to Jews because opposition to Zionism, that is the Israeli state and its crimes, was a barely disguised form of anti-Semitic hatred of the Jews. The argument became that identification with the state of Israel was integral to Jewish self-identity, especially as Israel was supposedly the only true guarantor of their safety. The then Foreign Minister of Israel, Abba Eban, made this explicit in 1973, writing, quote, "One of the chief tasks of any dialogue with the Gentile world is to prove that the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Anti-Zionism is merely the new anti-Semitism." Erwin Kotler, a professor of law at McGill University, asserted that the new anti-Semitism, quote, "is anchored in discrimination against the Jews as a people and the embodiment of that expression in Israel." The Israeli state and its defenders set up various initiatives to defend war crimes, delegitimize the left, and target solidarity actions with the Palestinians, including here in the UK. The Jewish Labour movement, for example, began its life as the Zionist Pole Zion, which affiliated to the Labour Party in 1928. It became the JLM in 2004 and is affiliated to the World Zionist Organization, whose Jewish Jerusalem program declares its commitment to, quote, "the unity of the Jewish people, its bond to its historic homeland Eretz Israel, and the centrality of the state of Israel and Jerusalem, its capital, in the life of the nation." The JLM's director, Ella Rose, previously worked as an officer at the Israeli embassy. Both organizations played a leading role in the anti-Semitism witch hunt in the Labour Party. The Equality and Human Rights Commission investigation into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was initiated based on formal complaints in summer and autumn 28 from these two groups. Another group is the Community Securities Trust, CST, in which Dave Rich is a key figure. He is the author of the book, The Left's Jewish Problem, Jeremy Corbyn, Israel and Anti-Semitism, published by Biteback, part owned by Political Holdings Limited, which is run by the billionaire former Tory party deputy chairman, Michael Ashcroft. And finally, there is the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Centre, BICOM, run by Podju Zabalodovic, a billionaire who also funds the Conservative Friends of Israel, and for whom Johnson, cited by Roger Cohen, works as a senior research fellow. Johnson, who is a former member of the Anti-Trotskyist Alliance for Workers' Liberty, is a leading advocate of imperialist military intervention and co-author of the 2006 Houston Manifesto, arguing in favor of the 2003 Iraq War and occupation. He defines left anti-Semitism as a, quote, "wild, demented, unhinged form of anti-Zionism, involving any comparison between Israel and Nazi Germany, quote, even in the language of intellectuals." He explicitly denounces the socialist movement, and Lenin in particular, for their advocacy of assimilation, writing of how, quote, "the left hoped to dissolve Jewish peoplehood in the solvent of progressive universalism." Among those playing a leading role against Corbyn over the past 5 years is the now former Labour MP Ruth Smeeth. She too held a position at BICOM, but a US Embassy diplomatic cable dated April 24, 2009, published by WikiLeaks, also identified her as a, quote, "strictly protect US informant." The insistence that Zionism is a legitimate and unchallengeable voice of the Jewish people, and that therefore denouncing Zionism is anti-Jewish, animates the entire left anti-Semitism witch hunt. Its pseudo-legal justification was provided by the demand for the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's working definition of anti-Semitism. Only finally agreed by the IHRA itself in 2016, the definition was then endorsed by a slew of international organisations and states, despite deep misgivings expressed by legal and human rights figures. Concerns focused on the attached 11 illustrative examples of anti-Semitism, of which fully 7 relate to Israel. These include the following: denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavour. Applying double standards by requiring of it behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. The definition also declares, quote, manifestations might include the targeting of the State of Israel, conceived of as a Jewish collectivity, and, quote, accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. Now, it seems to have struck no one that the formulas advanced in the IHRA definition, stressing that Zionism is integral to the Jewish faith and is inseparable from the State of Israel, play directly into the racist tropes of fascist propaganda. Among those criticising the IHRA definition were 243 British academics who signed a letter in 2017 stating that voices protesting the violation of the rights of Palestinians for more than 50 years, that's a quote, should not be silenced, and condemning the definition for conflating, quote, criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. In July 2018, human rights solicitor Jeffrey Binman wrote, quote, unfortunately, the definition and the examples are poorly drafted, misleading, and in practice have led to the suppression of legitimate debate and freedom of expression. In August 2018, Jeffrey Robertson QC said that several of the examples are so loosely drafted that they are likely to impact on legitimate criticisms of the Israeli government and of human rights abuses against Palestinians, and the definition therefore, quote, is not fit for any purpose that seeks to use it as an adjudicative standard. Nevertheless, the witch hunt of Corbyn and the Labour left has codified this reactionary offensive as the new orthodoxy and the basis for a far wider campaign against the left. It's a dangerous development for workers everywhere. David North, in the passage on the anti-Semitism campaign I quoted from earlier, was speaking at a public launch of the English language edition of Why Are They Back? Historical Falsification, Political Conspiracy and the Return of Fascism in Germany at Foyles in London. The book's author, Christoph Dreyer, is the Deputy Chairman of the Socialist Equality Party in Germany. He explained that his book sought to draw the attention of the international working class to political events of far-reaching significance, the elevation of the AfD, an avowedly far-right party, to become the official opposition in the German parliament. At the meeting, North said of Van Dreyer's book, quote, it is extraordinary that what has been taking place in Germany has gone almost completely unreported in the European and American press. The fact that the most politically influential party in Germany today, the official opposition party, the AfD, is a party led by out-and-out pro-Nazis, apologists for Hitler, has been largely ignored as if it's a non-event. The importance of Christoph's book is that he makes clear that what has taken place in Germany is a concerted political conspiracy involving the highest levels of the state with the complicity of an academic community indifferent to the resurgence of neo-Nazi forces. Excuse me. Now, far-right parties are attracting significant support in France, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Poland, and elsewhere. But let me focus on Germany. In 2018, German police forces registered 1,646 anti-Semitic criminal acts, with anti-Semitic acts of violence growing by 40% in a year. The largest number of anti-Semitic violent crimes were perpetrated by individuals associated with the far right, 670 out of 755. In 2019, attacks on people of the Jewish faith reached their highest level since statistics began being compiled 20 years ago, 5 to 6 every single day, with 93% committed by the right, including the terrorist attack on a synagogue in Halle. Yet even as the Zionists were busy demonizing the left and declaring Corbyn an existential threat to Britain's Jews, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu was rolling out the welcome mat to various far-right parties and leaders because of their shared nationalism, an embrace of Zionism's goal of an exodus of Jews from Europe, and mutual hostility to Muslims. Netanyahu has hosted Italy's Mussolini-admiring Interior Minister Matteo Salvini of the Anti-Immigrant Lega Party, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who described Admiral Miklos Horthy, Hungary's World War II era dictator, who collaborated with the Nazis in the murder of 565,000 Jews, as a, quote, exceptional statesman. He's hosted Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, who rules as part of a coalition with the Freedom Party, founded by 2 former Nazi SS officers, Philippines ruler and Hitler admirer Rodrigo Duterte, and Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil. This is where the threat to the Jews and the working class the world over comes from, the far right, including its Zionist variant. And again, I must insist, the answer to this threat is the development of the international socialist movement of the working class, which the Blairites and Zionists are so determined to prevent. All this unfolds under conditions where in the United States, Israel's primary ally and the most powerful imperialist nation in the world, Donald Trump is making a direct appeal to far-right groups and armed militias to support his refusal to accept defeat in the November 3rd presidential election and demanding that he is accepted as a de facto dictator. There is an online meeting at 5 p.m. UK time today, which Tom will provide details for. I urge you all to attend. Of course, none of these acute political dangers carries any weight for Starmer et al., who are bought and paid for defenders of imperialism. But nor does it put any steel in the political backbone of Corbyn and the caucus of invertebrates ludicrously known as the Labour left. I'm sure there'll be those among you who are here out of sympathy for Corbyn as a victim of the right wing. We, however, must urge you to confront uncomfortable truths. The fact is that Corbyn is responsible for his own fate, one that has been sealed by his refusal to honour the mandate on which he was elected 5 years ago. Corbyn won leadership of Labour in 2015 and then again in 2016 at the head of a popular rebellion involving hundreds of thousands of workers and young people demanding a political reckoning with the criminal, pro-business and warmongering legacy of the Blair and Brown governments. He was mandated not only to oppose the Blairites, but to kick them out of the party. But he refused to do so again and again, making one pathetic capitulation after another. He instead used all of his political authority among workers to preserve the control of the right wing, opposing all popular moves to expel them, while insisting on party unity. It was this which enabled the Blairites to pursue their plan to remove the Corbynites, centred on the anti-Semitism witch hunt of his leading allies, including, and I'm not naming all of them, former Mayor of London Ken Livingstone, Black Jewish activist Jackie Walker, Mark Wadsworth, Chris Williamson MP, and countless rank and file members. They then retook control of the party following the electoral disaster of December 2019. And I must stress, this defeat, like Corbyn's defeat in the party itself, was not because Labour was too left-wing, or because of Brexit, or the attacks on Corbyn by the Blairites and the media. Corbyn could have cut through all of that and won massive popular backing if he had fought back. But instead, he succeeded in convincing workers and young people that he would never fight and never achieve a damn thing on behalf of the millions in poverty and the millions more struggling to survive. Within weeks of retaking control of the party, the Blairites under Starmer began laying the basis for a fresh round of mass expulsions. On July 22nd, Labour officially apologised in the High Court to 7 former staffers from Labour's governance and legal unit involved in investigating accusations of anti-Semitism, who became whistleblowers in a July 2019 BBC Panorama documentary, Is Labour Anti-Semitic? Corbyn had previously issued a press release denouncing the Panorama allegations, which were clearly meant to reinforce the case for the prosecution in the forthcoming EHRC inquiry. The ground was thereby laid for a right-wing victory party when the IHRC's flimsy charges were finally published and Corbyn was suspended. To cite just some comments, Britain's chief rabbi told the Daily Mail immediately following that his unprecedented intervention in the run-up to last year's election, opposing a Labour vote as a threat to the, quote, very soul of our nation, had been vindicated. Israeli Labour Party politician Ayelet Namias Verbin posted on Twitter, quote, justice is done. Proud I was part of this puzzle. In the Times of Israel, Jonathan Goldstein declared, quote, the investigation and ouster of UK Labour Party head office, a case study for responding to far left extremism worldwide. The right wing are on the warpath. In contrast, Corbyn and company are once again waving the white flag of surrender. The EHRC's 130-page report does not prove widespread anti-Semitism within the Labour Party because it doesn't exist. Yet Corbyn accepted all its recommendations, once again leaving his supporters open to victimisation. Amid an inevitable purge of their supporters, and with many members leaving Labour in disgust, Corbyn and his coteries' message is still loyalty and unity, and a pathetic appeal for a return to the status quo. Corbyn told Sky News, quote, what I will be doing is appealing to the party to kindly think again. He later appealed to Labour members, quote, don't go away, don't leave the party, before falling completely silent even on his Twitter feed. Former Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott tweeted, divided parties don't win elections. Former Labour General Secretary Ian Lavery said, quote, we have got to try to keep people calm. This dispute with Jeremy has got to be resolved as quickly as we possibly can, and then we can move forward. Former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell tweeted, quote, in the interest of party unity, let's find a way of undoing and resolving this. At an online meeting organised by left Labour groupings Tribune, Momentum and Red Labour, McDonnell pleaded that if the objection was to Corbyn's, quote, language or timing, these are issues we can hammer out in discussion. Let's do it quickly. He said the large number of members leaving or threatening to leave the party was a form of self-harm. Then reaching out directly to Starmer, who has spoken of the need for a broad coalition to ensure Labour's general election victory in 2024, McDonnell added, the lessons of the United States is that you only win elections when you have massive rank and file activity that turns the vote out. It was extremely close. Biden only got there in the end because socialists on the ground turned the vote out. Now, Corbyn and company are pleading with Starmer not to expel them in return for a loyalty oath and a pledge to take Labour's unpalatable message of pro-business policies, militarism and collusion with the Tories during the COVID-19 pandemic and wrap it up in left verbiage. What conclusion must be drawn from all of this? Corbyn is absolutely opposed to any political struggle by workers and young people against the labour and trade union bureaucracy. For this reason, he has already delivered an electoral victory to Boris Johnson, for which the working class has paid a blood price in the unnecessary death of tens of thousands thanks to the Tory policy of herd immunity. Now he and his inner core of supporters are urging unity with Starmer, Labour's Torquemada, and for their own supporters to emulate the political cowardice of Bernie Sanders and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. McDonnell's praised Sanders for throwing his support behind Biden in the interest of, quote, the party, the country, and for the future movement. He said the lesson from the US is that you, quote, have to have a united party. I hope that lesson can be learned. Events testify to the complete collapse of Corbynism and all the claims made by the pseudo-left groups such as the Socialist Party and Socialist Workers' Party that the Labour Party could ever be a vehicle for socialism. The SEP warned from the outset that no change of leader or influx of left-leaning members could reverse Labour's transformation into a naked party of big business. Labour's abandonment of reforms and embrace of Thatcherite neoliberalism was not the product of the scheming of Blair and Brown. Rather, fundamental changes within world capitalism associated with globalisation had objectively undermined all organisations embedded in the nation state and seeking limited reforms through an accommodation with their own bourgeoisie. The conflict between rival imperialist powers for control of global markets and resources was demanding trade war and militarism abroad and austerity, authoritarianism and class war at home. Combating the agents of this capitalist perspective, such as Starmer and his allies, therefore demands far more than trench warfare to maintain a left rump within the Labour Party. It means building a new and genuinely socialist party. This lesson has been proved again and again, with Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, and Bernie Sanders in the United States. Yet once again, the pseudo-left groups are urging workers to stake everything on a leftward shift by a section of the bureaucracy. The Socialist Party, for example, has most recently tried to wipe out any memory of the years of support it gave to Corbyn, with the claim that it had warned that Starmer wanted to annihilate the last vestiges of Corbynism. Somehow, it doesn't explain, it adds, quote, the opportunity to transform Labour into an anti-austerity socialist party was thrown away as endless compromises were made. But these compromises were engineered by Corbyn, nominal left trade union leaders such as Len McCluskey of Unite, and all those the SP supported, and still does. They now urge, quote, instead of pleading with Starmer, left trade unions should immediately institute a call for a conference to be a council of war of the workers' movement, inside and outside of the Labour Party, to fight this attack and to discuss how to ensure workers have a vehicle that does fight for their interests. Now, as I've already made clear, this mythical fight back by mythical left trade unions is being advanced once again as the basis for founding a new mass workers' party with a socialist programme. Their words. But this is all nonsense. In any event, they make clear that this is all conceived of only as a means to, quote, turn the heat up on Starmer and the Labour right. As for Corbyn's boosters in the Socialist Workers' Party, its leader, Alex Kalinikos, writes now of Labour's move, quote, sharply back to the extreme centre, and also urges the left to begin, quote, preparing to break with the bankrupt politics of the extreme centre that is being forcibly reimposed on Labour and form a new socialist party. Now, this party, according to the SWP, will naturally be a Labour Party Mark II, with Kalinikos declaring, quote, within this broader left, we need a stronger organised revolutionary pole, by which he means the following. Let us in and allow us to act as defenders of your exposed left flank as you betray the working class. This constant searching for a supposed left faction of the labour and trade union bureaucracy is endlessly promoted by the pseudo-left for one reason: to prevent a genuine break from the bureaucracy by the working class. It is a dangerous and debilitating fantasy that must now end once and for all. The protracted death of the Labour Party must instead become the occasion for a political turn by the working class to revolutionary socialist internationalism, to the building of the SEP and its sister parties in the International Committee of the Fourth International. Thank you for listening.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for that excellent report. I'd like to echo briefly that final point to all those who are watching, who have, of course, now been through the full experience of Corbynism, who have seen internationally the experience of Syriza, of Podemos, and of Bernie Sanders in the United States, and who are now seeing the need for a genuinely socialist, independent revolutionary party. Please get in contact with us. The link is on your screen now. Put in a note requesting either to join the Socialist Equality Party or to engage in discussions with us about what that means, about our perspective. Follow us on the World Socialist website, see what it is we have to say, the commentary we offer, the political analysis we're making, and make the decision today to get involved with us and with the construction of a revolutionary party of the working class. Chris, I'd like to encourage everyone again who's watching this, please write in with your questions. Obviously, that was an extensive report. Chris has raised a number of issues, any one of which I think would lead to, could be taken up and lead to an interesting discussion. So do leave questions in the comments bar on the Facebook Live event page. Before we turn to those, Chris, I think the historical approach that was taken in your remarks is crucial. I think it really demonstrates the scale of the lie that's being perpetrated by the anti-Semitism campaign and the scale of its implications. I think the points on its undermining of the real fight against fascism and its outlawing of opposition to the crimes of the Israeli state. Many people, I think, will recognize that these are of exceptional importance in these specific conditions, given what's going on in the United States at the moment. You raised it in your report, but I thought perhaps it might be the best way to begin this meeting to really give a sense of the political context in which this discussion is taking place, the escalation of the anti-Semitism witch hunt is taking place, by referring to by perhaps expanding on the political issues that are raised by the US presidential elections crisis as a way to kick us off.
Yes, Tom. If I may, I'd like to do that by, for want of a better term, seeking to direct our viewers today to the Congress resolution that's just been published by the Socialist Equality Party. We were meeting in Congress between October 24th and 27th online because of the situation with COVID-19. And there was an extensive discussion of the draft Congress resolution, but we delayed publication of that resolution. First of all, to incorporate all the corrections that have been made by our own members and suggestions and reformulations, but primarily, more than anything else, the delay was in order to take cognizance of these extraordinary events in the United States, in which it was already clear that Trump had no intention of accepting a loss to Joseph Biden and the Democrats, should that come to pass. And he'd been mobilizing a campaign to delegitimize the election and whip up far-right groups, including militias, in order to stage provocations on election day and to legitimize his plans. Well, we waited until events had unfolded somewhat. There was constant discussion, of course, in our party on the significance of what was taking place, and we tried to formulate, based on not just discussions in the UK but internationally, the significance of these events. And I just, if I might, just like to read 3 points out of the Congress resolution that we've just published. I do recommend it's read because it puts forward a revolutionary perspective for the working class on the conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic and a raging crisis of capitalism worldwide, which demands a socialist solution. Our resolution said the following: the centre of the global crisis of capitalism is the United States, where Donald Trump is refusing to accept losing the November 3rd presidential election and is actively engaged in a coup to establish a personalist dictatorship. The victory of Joseph Biden was a massive popular repudiation of Trump, with the Democrats' victory secured largely through an increased working class and youth vote. But Trump has responded as he threatened to before the election, seeking to mobilize sections of the military, police and border patrol, inciting fascist gangs, and using bogus claims of voter fraud to enable Republican legislators, fronted by his Attorney General William Barr, and a stacked Supreme Court, to overturn the result. Trump's conspiracy has the full support of the Republican Party, which now acts as a fascistic and criminal syndicate. Next point, we say, opposing Trump's coup and the threat of dictatorship cannot be entrusted to the Democrats, whose sole concern is to uphold the interests of US imperialism against the working class. Whatever happens in the immediate period ahead, there will be no return to normality. The move towards authoritarian rule is not the product of Trump as an individual. The democratic structures in the US are breaking down under the weight of the insoluble economic and political crisis of American and world capitalism, characterized by staggering levels of social inequality, exacerbated by the global COVID-19 pandemic, and the homicidal herd immunity policy of the ruling classes. The Democrats, a party of Wall Street and the military, fear above all an explosion of popular protest and resistance from below that would threaten the rule of the financial and corporate oligarchy. Prior to the election, they refused to mobilize against Trump's coup plotting, even when he threatened to send in the army against those protesting the police murder of George Floyd. And after his appeal to the far right prompted a plot to kidnap and murder Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. Their pro-business agenda then allowed Trump to actually increase his own vote among sections of the most oppressed workers by exploiting their social misery and hatred of the political establishment. In the aftermath of the election, Biden is systematically dismissing any threat of a coup and urging unity with the Republicans. His offer to the US ruling elite is to reject Trump's plans and allow the Democrats to head a right-wing administration of austerity and militarism run on the say-so of the Republican Party, while denouncing socialism and relentlessly promoting race and identity to divide and demoralize the working class. This would create the best conditions for the further growth of a far-right movement, whether led by Trump or someone else. Finally, we stress and insist on the independent intervention of the working class. We say the Socialist Equality Party, our sister party in the United States, is calling for a nationwide political strike to remove Trump and his co-conspirators. If Trump succeeds in overturning the election, it will provoke a massive outpouring in every city in the country under conditions where the state and its forces of repression lacked any semblance of legitimacy. Not only did Biden defeat Trump in terms of the popular vote and the electoral college vote, the states and areas he won are the most powerful economic and industrial areas of the US, with a massively powerful working class. But the defeat of the attempted coup d'etat depends upon the intervention of the working class, which must take the lead in the defense of democratic rights. This movement cannot stop short of breaking the grip of the oligarchy and restructuring economic life on a socialist basis. Such a struggle by workers in the US against the threat of dictatorship will meet with massive support from workers all over the world and deliver a blow to the imperialist powers everywhere. Now, I want to stress, we're not here making predictions about what is going to take place. We're not taking book as if this is some sort of horse race. Of course, there's a fight within ruling circles about what is the best course of action. But whatever course of action is taken, whether by Trump or Biden, will lead to further pain and suffering for the working class, death through the pandemic, a deeper descent into economic and social catastrophe, and will benefit Trump and a far-right movement, whether or not Biden is inaugurated. We're doing this in order to insist on the independent political mobilization of the working class against any and all attempts to subordinate the working class to the Democrats, to the trade union apparatus, or for that matter, Trump himself. We are the representatives of the independent voice of working people in the struggle for socialism. And that's the approach that we take in the United States. It's also the approach that we take in the struggle against the anti-Semitism witch hunt here in the UK.
Thank you, Chris. I should say at this point, emphasize that the SCP and the World Socialist website have a long and proud record in the struggle against fascism. Our German comrades have been conducting a struggle over many years against the attempt to revive Nazi ideology, far-right fascist politics through the German universities. This began largely with the comment of a German university, Humboldt University professor, Jörg Babarowski, who stated in a major German newspaper the lines that Hitler was not vicious. He didn't want to discuss the extermination of the Jews at his dinner table. Now our youth movement has taken up a fight against this individual and against the whole flight to the right and protection and promotion of fascist politics in Germany generally, through particularly through the Alternative for Deutschland party, the AfD. We do today have a special offer on our bookstore, merringbooks.co.uk, for the book Why Are They Back?, authored by Christoph van Dryer. Chris mentioned it in his report. This book details the theoretical, political struggle that's been waged by our movement in Germany, with all of the historical questions that are raised by that fight. In describing the book, the author, Christoph van Dryer, as I said, he explains the chapters in this book deal in detail with the role of academics, the media, political parties, and the state apparatus in building up and strengthening the AfD. It is not written from the standpoint of a neutral observer, but as a contribution to the struggle against the return of militarism and fascism. And he added this book was only possible because the Socialist Equality Party and its youth organization, the IYSSE, opposed the attempts to rehabilitate Nazi ideology. It was only in this struggle that the extent of the shift to the right by the ruling class and the enormous opposition against it became clearly visible among students and workers. I would strongly encourage everyone who is interested in or who is watching this today and seeking the correct political perspective on which to fight this exceptionally dangerous development, to look at this book and to buy it. We have a question that's come in that I think is somewhat related to you, Chris, which asks, I'm confused by the statement that the Zionists are aligning themselves with the right, both within the Conservative Party and the right within Labour, by participating in the smear campaign against the left, whereas the greater threat to Jews in general is posed by the fascist tendencies of the far right. Why would they align themselves with the side which threatens them? I think you addressed parts of this in your report, but perhaps you could expand on that question.
Well, yes, it is. I'm just reading the question because I've got it on my phone down here. You have to begin by understanding what Zionism is and what it became. I mean, this is a right-wing nationalist movement. The government in Israel, Netanyahu's government, is a far-right government. It's an extreme right-wing government that stays in power through the forcible repression of 20% of its own Arab population, and also the repression in the occupied territories of Gaza and the West Bank. His is a government in alliance with extreme right-wing tendencies, and it relies overwhelmingly on the support of US imperialism, and allows Israel, has transformed Israel into a sort of military protectorate in the Middle East. Zionism, as has been, is clear, opposed consciously any attempt at the assimilation of Jewish people, and advanced their separation and the formation of a state. That state, since it's been founded, has proved to be a political disaster for the Jewish people, based upon the displacement of another people, and has involved Jewish Israeli citizens in a terrible disaster, not just for the Palestinians, but for Jews themselves and for the peoples of the entire Middle East. A country permanently at war with its neighbours, socially regressive, increasingly right-wing, and torn by huge and growing social tensions between a wealthy elite and a population who are suffering tremendously, as are workers in every single country. Netanyahu, as I've pointed out, considers other right-wing nationalist regimes as friends of Israel, and there is an attempt by the far right to change tack somewhat on anti-Semitism. Many of them proclaim themselves to be supporters of the State of Israel, as I indicated, because of many reasons. Because they are happy to contemplate the exodus of Jews from their own countries to Israel, because they endorse the nationalist agenda of the Netanyahu government, finding Netanyahu a fellow traveller, and because they are all fanatically Islamophobic. You know, by far the most prevalent form of racism and including violent right-wing racism in Europe is directed against Muslims. That's not to say that, you know, the members of these parties have suddenly become friends of Jewish people. You know, this is often the most cynical political masquerade, and you know, anti-Semitism is as wedded to the far right as it ever was. But based upon the most limited and immediate exigencies, there is an attempt being made to say that, you know, it's not the far right which is the main threat, it's the left. Because the left opposes generally Zionism, whereas the far right supports it. I mean, you know, these some extraordinary features of the fact that, you know, a lot of the Christian fundamentalists are tremendous supporters of Israel because, according to their reading of biblical prophecy, you know, the new millennia will be inaugurated by when the Jews all have their own state. It's these are really quite reactionary developments, but these are political considerations. As far as Zionism is concerned, the threat does indeed come from the left. As far as Jewish people are concerned, the threat comes from the right. We absolutely reject any association between Zionism and the either immediate or historic interests of the world's Jews. You know, we take a class approach. We fight for the unification of the working class, irrespective of religion, ethnicity, all of the artificial divisions cultivated by capitalism, and we fight for the socialist unification and the ending of all national divisions and the development of a socialist world. We are not, you know, we do not take a special exception for Israel, as is claimed, you know, by the IHRA definition. We are for the ending of the, for instance, of the division of the Middle East into a network of hot antagonistic nation states, none of which have any particular validity or significance historically, and for the development of the United Socialist States of the Middle East that would be able to utilize the enormous resources of that region for the benefit of all its peoples. And you know, that is our approach. We absolutely repudiate this vile slander trying to associate socialism with anti-Semitism. To be anti-Zionist is not to be anti-Semitic. I hope that answers the question you had.
I think it was a clear answer. Thank you, Chris. Just looking through some of the questions we've been sent in and thinking of the best way, the best order in which to run through them, I think perhaps the one that most clearly follows on from that and might clarify it as well is an explanation of how the anti-Semitism campaign is being waged more broadly than the Labour Party itself in terms of the expulsion of Labour members. Where else have we seen this campaign have the effect of outlawing, of banning events, censoring opinions, and so on and so forth. I mean, I can speak to that question as far as the universities, but I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to speak on it, speak on other issues before I do so.
Well, perhaps you can begin, Tom.
Sure, sure. I mean, there has been a push since the Conservative Party government took its lead from the anti-Semitism campaign, which that was begun in the Labour Party. And we've stressed, and Chris did in his report, that this is, it's not simply a question of taking the lead, but this is a witch hunt that is coordinated between the Labour Party right, the Conservative Party, and sections of the state and sections of the Israeli state with an interest in maintaining a pro-Israel politics in Britain. And what the one element of the Conservative government's efforts has been to try and enforce on the universities the same situation that's now, the same regime that's now being created in the Labour Party, where opposition to the crimes of the Israeli state and the defense of the rights of the Palestinians is branded as unacceptable political speech, as equivalent with anti-Semitism. As Chris has been explaining, there's an equal sign that's drawn between the two, and in effect to ban it. Since I think 2016, 2017, Robert Jenrick, the communities minister, Conservative communities minister, has been pushing for universities to sign themselves up to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which Chris has explained is a mechanism for outlawing opposition, principal political opposition to the state of Israel and its nationalist politics. They've been attempting to pressure university administrations into adopting that definition of anti-Semitism, and through that pressuring them to police the political activity of students on campus. This has now taken a substantial, this has now escalated substantially with the university, with Education Secretary, excuse me, Gavin Williamson himself, sending a letter to UK university vice-chancellors where he calls it, I think the phrase is frankly disturbing, that most universities have not adopted, have not played ball, have not adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Indeed, several very prestigious universities, this is a problem for the government, have said directly that they will not adopt this definition for all of the massive legal, historical, political problems there are with it. This is not acceptable to the Tory government. And Williamson warned, and this is a quote, that, quote, the overwhelming majority of institutions, if he did not see, excuse me, the overwhelming majority of institutions adopting the definition by Christmas, then he would ask the Office for Students, the regulatory body established by the Tory government a few years ago, to take regulatory action, which he said possibly included suspending funding streams. So under pain, I mean, universities are under an immense amount of financial pressure with the pandemic crisis, and under pain of driving them into bankruptcy, essentially, the government is going to enforce this political, definition, required definition upon them. Now, the consequences of that are exceptionally severe. The World Socialist website has already drawn attention to one situation where students at King's College London, who were associated with Palestine, pro-Palestinian rights campaigning society at the university, were barred from the university campus during, I believe it was either a royal visit, a UK royal visit, or a visit of the of an Israeli ambassador. And you only have to look at large amounts of the right-wing media, increasingly the media as a whole, to see the ferocious denunciations of students who protest visiting Israeli officials to any university campus. There's an attempt to prevent this from taking place anymore. And it's, as Chris has explained, it's bound up with attempting to suppress opposition to imperialist actions, interventions, wars, war crimes in the Middle East, in which Israel plays as the closest ally of the United States in that region, a central role in helping to advance and in facilitating the interventions of the US and its allies in that region, and through the essentially banning, so they hope, of criticism of that state, or even of discussing its role, frankly. I mean, in the way that this definition has been applied in that region, they hope to be able to outlaw political opposition to further wars in the Middle East, and that is very much bound up, of course, with the intensifying war drive against Iran, in which an anti-Iranian axis is being formed in the Middle East, of which Israel forms a central part. This is exceptionally relevant now, given what we've written about on the World Socialist website just recently, where a number of US officials have recently traveled to Iran following Trump's refusal to accept his defeat in presidential elections, and following his purge, essentially, of the leadership of the Pentagon, Secretary of State of Defense and others. What could be taking place here is preparation for what we've called a December surprise, an action, a declaration of war or some form of aggression taken by Donald Trump against Iran, with the help of Israel, or with the provocation or whatever else is necessary of Israel, to launch the United States into a war which he could use as a pretext for cancelling or ignoring or any other sort of mechanism of nullifying the recent elections. These are the sort of imperialist machinations that will be covered by this sort of regime of censorship that would be established if this campaign branding all opposition to Israel as a form of anti-Semitism, which, as Chris says, has immensely reactionary political implications. I mean, it is entirely premised on the association of Jewish people all over the world, no matter where, what their political beliefs, with the state of Israel and its actions. And this can only have terrible, terrible reactionary consequences. But there is a big movement on it at the universities. And I think that heralds, in many ways, a lot of reactionary British politics is trialled on the campuses and then rolled out into wider society. And it's one of the fronts in this campaign. It proves it's very far from being just a question of the person of Jeremy Corbyn. This is Corbyn as a sort of stalking horse for an attack on left-wing politics amongst workers and young people more generally. I think it's a very instructive episode, and I'd encourage people to read the coverage we've written on it in the World Socialist website.
If I just might add a few points to what Tom's raised. There are many examples that can be cited internationally, but I'll just stick with one. Pompeo, in his role of Secretary of State, Trump's Secretary of State, even after having clearly lost the election, he's said he's going to establish a new process by which the United States can declare groups, including NGOs, to be anti-Semitic. He's already indicated in previous comments some of the organizations he's got in mind as being described as anti-Semitic. They include Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Oxfam. Now, if Oxfam can be described as anti-Semitic, who cannot be described as anti-Semitic? I mean, the formulations that he used, when we say it prescribes legitimate criticism and opposition to Israel, what are the implications of this for Palestinian groups? What are the implications of this for the Palestinians? What are the implications of this for Britain's Muslim population? Europe's Muslim population? And then there's the left, which is always at the centre of all of this. I mean, when the ruling class looks at things, they look not at, you know, the present balance of class forces, but how they preserve their class rule. They know that they face substantial and growing social and political opposition all over the world to their criminal policies at home and their imperialist warmongering, and they're setting in train the machinery for suppressing it, and suppressing the one tendency that they fear the growth of, which is the socialist left. And Corbyn's betrayal in the Labour Party is more than simply a betrayal of the hundreds of thousands of people, workers and young people, who joined expecting him to fight. He's betraying the fundamental interests of the working class all over the world. When he let this happen, he delivered a blow to the international working class. It was a criminal refusal to fight. It was not simply opening the door for a witch hunt of the Labour left, but a witch hunt of the international left, of Muslims, broad swathes of the population, and an open door to suppress opposition to imperialist warmongering, war crimes perpetrated that will cost thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives. You know, this is not, he has not got the right to do what he did. He was entrusted, and he betrayed that trust. And we knew he would. But many of the people that supported him clearly did not. And that's why when we're saying about what's happening in the Labour Party, it's not just the Labour Party won't recover from what he's done. The Corbynite left will never recover from what it has done. It's not a question of waiting on Corbyn or some other remnant of the Corbyn movement. I mean, you know, the Socialist Party is now boosting Chris Williamson as a potential replacement for Corbyn. That's like going from Woolworths to the bargain basement of Woolworths. You know, this is someone who started off as a Blairite, became a Corbynite, and then now he's a disillusioned Corbynite and thinking that he sees his model, the Black Panthers in the United States. None of these people will fight for anything that's worth fighting for. They're all opponents of genuine socialism. They all want to advocate various bankrupt remnants and variants of a failed political perspective that is now, unless it is broken from, threatens the working class with disaster. And make no mistake, if Pompeo doesn't do this, there's a very good likelihood they'll be done by Joe Biden or whoever he appoints as his Secretary of State. This is a global witch hunt, and it has to be opposed.
I think, well, you said in your opening report that, you know, we're asking people who may have been enthused initially by what they thought Corbynism represented to confront some uncomfortable truths. There's a question we've been sent in, which is a long question. I'm going to summarize it, and I'm going to do my best to do justice to it, which argues essentially against this, what you've been saying, that Corbyn did not capitulate because the mainstream media, I'm summarizing the question, weren't going to give him the opportunity to counter or refute the lies and falsehoods, and that whatever he said, it would be condemned by the mainstream media and the usual suspects. and that on this basis, it's unfair to accuse him of capitulation. I mean, I think in response to this, we could go through more in detail what role Corbyn and the Labour left played in response to the anti-Semitism witch hunt that was launched against them, and in particular, or more particularly, against the people who had joined the Labour Party, looking for a fight, looking essentially to kick the Blairites out of the party and wage an anti-austerity, anti-war struggle. The Labour Leaks report that was authored by Corbyn's General Secretary choice, Jenny Formby, as essentially a sort of preemptive legal response to the investigation of the Equality and Human Rights Commission report, went through in detail, and this was of course largely not reported, the role that had been played by Labour HQ in transforming what had initially been an attempt to just bureaucratically prevent large swathes of Labour's new membership from voting and from defending Corbyn in a coup attempt that was launched by his MPs. When that failed, that was transformed. This is essentially what the Labour Leaks report showed. This was transformed into the anti-Semitism campaign in an attempt to have members expelled through accusations of anti-Semitism. Now, the Labour Leaks report was touted by groups supportive of Corbyn as proof that this was, which is true, that these accusations of a mass anti-Semitism crisis in the Labour Party were unfounded, were consisted of a series of manipulations of complaints, the lodging of false complaints, the then manipulation of those complaints for the largest political effect by people in Labour HQ. What wasn't said is that the Labour Leaks report also detailed how Corbyn and his group, the group around him, the leader of the opposition's office, had actively participated in the expulsion of members on these claims. In fact, the Labour Leaks report, which is meant to be a defence of against the anti-Semitism witch hunt, says this report thoroughly disproves any suggestion that the allegations of anti-Semitism is all a smear or a witch hunt. And it goes through and it details how Corbyn and his advisors, Seamus Milne and the rest, played the driving role in ensuring that Livingston was thrown out, that Wadsworth and Jackie Walker's cases were expedited. That happened following a conversation between Corbyn, I believe McDonnell, and the Jewish Labour movement, and that Corbyn and his staff were the most eager to see Chris Williamson thrown out when that became an issue in the Labour Party. In other words, Corbyn and his fellows, far from making any attempt that was then blocked by anyone else, the media or political figures, to fight this campaign, they were actively trying at every stage to prove their loyalty to the Labour right wing, to prove that they would do anything. They would carry out any expulsions that were demanded of them by the Blairites and their allies in order to preserve what they continuously refer to as party unity. I think it's the Labour, had that not been the case, of course, had any political fight been waged by Corbyn calling upon his 400,000, 500,000, whatever percentage of the membership, wherever you want to put it, supporters, and the support he would have found more broadly in the working class if any vaguely principled struggle had been waged against this smear campaign, that would have smashed through any continuing attempt to smear Corbyn or to suppress his views in the media and so on. But what the Labour Leaks report demonstrates is that this was never the intention of Corbyn and the Labour left. It was always for a continual extending of an olive branch to the Labour right wing. But Chris, I'm sure you can speak more and perhaps in general, either on this question or in general, the role of the Labour left and particularly the Socialist Campaign Group within the Labour Party?
Well, I'd like to actually, because I've got this it's a reader's question, because he's citing our material. Just let me just read a bit more extensively than you summarised, Tom. Says who he is and so on and so forth. I have put forward the argument that Jeremy Corbyn is not surrendering nor capitulating to his enemies, as he is constantly accused of doing by voices on the left. I don't know who those voices are. And that the reality is that the very MSM mainstream media who have conspired in the smear campaigns against Jeremy Corbyn were never ever going to give him the opportunity to counter and or refute their lies and falsehoods. And that whatever he says, it is condemned by the MSM and the usual suspects. My point, of course, being that if it is impossible for him to get fair coverage by the MSM et al., who will just smear him whatever he says, then given that this has been the reality ever since he was elected leader and since he stood down, then it is unjustified to accuse him of surrendering or capitulating to those who smear him, and yet the WSWS has done so repeatedly. Given that you do keep accusing him of capitulating, etc., I'd be really grateful if you could explain how he can refute the claims, etc., if the MSM et al. Just vilify and condemns him when he does. I am, of course, mainly referring to the anti-Semitism smear campaign. P.S. This is a genuine request. I'm sure it's a genuine request. Look, let's address this on its own terms for a moment here. What is being said? Jeremy Corbyn and his various retreats can't be described as capitulation, because no matter what he did, he would still be attacked by the mainstream media and his opponents. So therefore, nothing different could be done. Now, what are the implications of that? There's a position that you can't fight for principles because you will meet opposition from your opponents. There's something really deeply reactionary about Jeremy Corbyn and what he represents in the British working class, because he's not a new phenomenon. He's the tattered modern day representative of a school of thought, a political tendency based on the fine art of the possible, class collaboration, a sort of worshipping of parliamentary procedure, a liberal mixture of sort of a religious turn the other cheek approach to politics. You know, Corbyn was associated right from the beginning when he said he was going to develop a new kind of politics that wasn't personal, that, you know, fought for ideas, wouldn't descend from the Olympian heights to the nitty-gritty of, you know, opposing the Tories, opposing the employers, fighting to mobilise the working class. His was going to be an appeal to some great altruistic sentiment that existed in the population. And he generated and made his appeal based upon a conscious, deliberate attempt to suppress the realities of contemporary society based upon ruthless class struggle. Jeremy Corbyn sort of describes politics as if it's a cricket match, and he encourages his supporters to say, well, this isn't fair, but politics isn't a cricket match, politics is war. It's the conflict of irreconcilably opposed class forces. The ruling class in Britain, as it is internationally, is utterly and completely ruthless in the preservation of its interests. The greatest danger for the working class if it doesn't recognise that it too must be equally ruthless in pursuit of its own interests. And that must find conscious political expression in the development of a combat party of the working class armed with a socialist and internationalist programme. Jeremy Corbyn represents everything that is backward looking in the working class. It's a sort of middle class do-gooding soporifics to blunt the class struggle, to suppress any independent initiative by the working class, to encourage its subordination to the labour and trade union bureaucracy, to wed it to a parliamentary perspective at all costs. That's what he represents. And when someone who's clearly genuine says, you can't fight because someone will oppose you, well, what is the logic of that? If you're doing something right, when will the mainstream media not attack you? If you're fighting for socialism, you should expect to be vilified, hounded at every corner by the representatives of the ruling class. And you make your appeal to the working class to fight that, fight back. Not simply as an emotional appeal, but by recognising the realities of contemporary class society and adopting a revolutionary internationalist alternative perspective. There is a section of the Corbynites which we appeal to, which are those that wanted to fight. And we will do so by rejecting another section of the Corbyn supporters that were attracted on the basis of his milk of human kindness nonsense. That are always looking for a compromise when no compromise is possible. I just think that this should be ingrained in the working class. Workers have gone through enough bitter experience to know that the ruling class will give you nothing, will not cede an inch outside of a political struggle. And that if you're fighting for socialism, which is the overthrow of the capitalist order, then this sort of stuff, this passivity, complacency, defeatism and cowardice should be purged from the workers' movement. It should be an anathema to anyone who genuinely considers themselves to be a socialist.
Thank you, Chris. So there's a question that I think supports what you're saying by taking our attention to the seriousness of the threat of the far right that's confronted. The questioner asks, the rise of the far right seems to have so far taken a different form in the UK to Germany, France and other European nations, rather than groups like the AfD or Front National, which aim to mobilise a reactionary layer of the population. We have seen the far right grow as a behind closed doors conspiracy in the Tory party, the rise of figures like Dominic Cummings or Toby Young, and Corbyn's failure to warn about the impending threat, such as the herd immunity policy. Does the ousting of Corbyn and public attacks on the left indicate that the ruling class is preparing to build a mass fascistic movement in the UK? I mean, I think certainly something I draw out of that question to put to you is the question of herd immunity, what that says about the state of contemporary capitalism, the nature of the politics it's bound up with, and again, the role that Corbynism played in laying down the road that got us where we are with it today in terms of the state of the pandemic and the crisis of the pandemic in the UK. But that's how what I take from the question, but I encourage you to answer it however you will.
Well, there's always been difficulties in generating a far-right movement in Britain. We keep trying, and we shouldn't. There's no cause for complacency. I mean, there's been a systematic attack for decades, and I think, you know, we've discussed this quite a lot. That there are, you know, from a different starting point, what is very significant, a very significant element in Britain is how closely it follows developments in the United States, not just directly politically, but also culturally. You know, Britain has a long history in which, you know, politics has been based on class, you know, however confused a form. But there's been a systematic attack for decades on these conceptions to weaken an attempt to weaken the identity of the working class and to atomize it, not just from the right, but also from the left. The pursuit, a constant pursuit of identity politics to assert that class, or even when it exists, is only one manifestation of a whole variety of different struggles, different forms of oppression, and shouldn't be prioritized. You know, this is a theories associated with Chantal Mouffe and others. This has enormous weight in the Labour Party, and not on the right, on the left. I use the term advisedly. There are other forms of attack. The diminishing of a class analysis is associated with the cultivation of all sorts of individualist notions, whether that's identity, as I've already said, or a sort of extreme individualism. Look at the take-up rate, for example, of a belief in the ludicrous nostrums of the anti-lockdown, anti-vaxxer, QAnon conspiracy theorists in the UK. It's a minority position, but it finds an audience amongst the most politically disoriented. They've tried to get right-wing parties going, you know, before the National Front, the British National Party, most recently the sterling efforts provided by that Tory outlier, Nigel Farage, with his Brexit party, and now he's going to set up something, I can't remember the exact name, something like Freedom or some such nonsense, based on mobilising against measures to combat COVID-19. But there's always the fact that the Tory party has always been a focus for the far right. Trotsky certainly predicted that a fascist movement would emerge out of the Tory party in the 1930s. There are extreme right-wing elements in the leadership of the Tory party. No one should, and I'm sure nobody on this call would swallow all this nonsense about portraying Boris Johnson as a harmless buffoon. He's a right-wing ideologue of long standing, and he's surrounded by other right-wing ideologues who hate the working class, despise it with a vengeance, and would do anything to maintain power. I don't think it's for us to predict or deny the possibility of the development of a far-right movement. What I think we should be focusing on, and I'm sure that our questioner would support this, is recognising that these dangers are international in scope. The point about it is that the threat of authoritarianism and the development of the far right comes from the insoluble contradictions within capitalism. The huge growth of social inequality, the demand of the ruling class to overcome its crisis through the ruthless exploitation of the working class and the pursuance of trade and military warfare on a global scale. None of this is compatible with democratic forms of rule. That's why the state is mobilized and increasingly against the working class, why supposedly democratic parties themselves become more authoritarian, and in the absence of a challenge by the working class, why there is a very real possibility of far-right tendencies mobilizing, exploiting social discontent, certainly amongst the ruinized middle class, but also among sections of the working class, and developing a movement. It won't be wearing the swastika and praising Hitler in Britain, but that's not what is fundamental here. What is fundamental is to understand that the working class is now in a fight, the likes of which it has never before seen. World capitalism is entering a period of acute economic, political, and social crisis. There will be an extraordinary development of the class struggle. It already began in 2019, was partially suppressed during the pandemic, and it's re-emerging now. But it must have a perspective, it must have a leadership, and it can't be the old reformist nostrums associated with Corbynism. It must be the perspective of world socialist revolution articulated by the International Committee of the Fourth International, the Trotskyist movement, its publication, the World Socialist website, and its British section, the Socialist Equality Party.
Well, in terms of the rooting these developments in the exceptionally far advanced now crisis of world capitalism and the breaking apart, frankly, of democracy under the enormous weight of social inequality, linking that too with the steady march to the right, as you've mentioned, of all parties which once claimed a certain democratic or left-wing heritage. I just think, since it's up on the screen now, it's important to note that these are all huge historical questions. They raise all of the fundamental issues, really, of the 20th century, political questions that the working class has an immense amount of experience with over the course of the 20th century. I know our focus as a political movement, or one of our central focuses, is the fight to bring that history of the revolutionary movement and of the working class into the contemporary understanding of today's working class, raise its consciousness as a necessary part of developing an independent political leadership, a working class leadership, and a revolutionary perspective. In that light, I would encourage people who are interested in these questions and in researching them in detail themselves to go to our bookstore, merringbooks.co.uk. You can see a number of our titles up on your screen at the moment. I think certainly in relation to the points Chris has raised about the fundamental problems of capitalism, the book you see there, The Russian Revolution in the Unfinished 20th Century, is a collection of essays that really everyone should read to have an understanding of the period we're in and of the political issues that confront us and the answers that have to be given. There are numerous other titles available through this bookstore, not least our recent Congress resolution, which Chris has cited from, and also our two Congress resolutions previous to that, the first of which was titled the strategic lessons of Jeremy Corbyn, of Corbynism, and the second referred to the resurgence of the class struggle and the task of the Socialist Equality Party. Both dealt quite extensively with the historical record of the socialist movement and the Trotskyist movement in relation to the Labour Party, and on that basis how we approached the question of Corbynism and why it was that we rejected from the beginning the idea that this was, or that there ever could be, a sort of socialist revival of the Labour Party. I'm just looking through some of our questions now. This is on apparently a different topic, but of course, they're all related. A questioner asks if we can say something about Corbyn's virtual silence on the persecution of Assange. Of course, Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, now imprisoned in Belmarsh in London. In contrast to Starmer, who as Director of Public Prosecutions was instrumental in using a Swedish case as an indirect ploy to eventually have Assange extradited to the United States. It's off the point of anti-Semitism, but I think obviously speaks to the question of what Corbynism is that you've just spoken to as a political phenomenon. And perhaps the people watching would be interested in what we have to say about that in relation to Assange.
Well, Tom, you've been involved very intimately with the issue of Julian Assange. Why don't you answer this question?
Well, I mean, we have to begin. I would imagine that most of the people watching this are familiar with the case of Assange, but as a way of summing it up incredibly briefly, Assange is, of course, the founder of WikiLeaks, which has been the subject of essentially a decade-long persecution by all of the imperialist governments of the world for its exposure of their war crimes, their brutal diplomatic intrigues, their human rights abuses, use of torture against the world, the oppressed peoples of the world. Assange was held effectively arbitrarily detained in ultimately the Ecuadorian embassy in London for I think 6 or 7 years ultimately, under the threat of being extradited to Sweden on the basis of it was clear at the time and what have now been definitively proved to be entirely bogus sexual assault charges manufactured by the Swedish state. That extradition to Sweden would have served as a platform for his future extradition to the United States. All of that has now come to a head in the recent year. Assange was seized from the Ecuadorian embassy, thrown into London's Belmarsh maximum security prison, and he's since been through a pseudo-legal travesty of an extradition hearing to determine whether or not the British government will send him on to the United States, where it's clear from the charges the United States has brought, he will be disappeared into the deepest, darkest hole that the American prison system has if he avoids the death penalty. We've played a leading role, of course, in opposing this. We've explained that what is at stake here is not simply the fate of an individual, of course. It is a fundamental question of democratic rights. And beyond that, it's a class question, the question of the right of the working class internationally, particularly most of the press sections, to fight back against imperialist aggression against them. This is essentially what the significance of Assange and WikiLeaks, in that it gave a spur to anti-imperialist sentiment all over the world. That was, for the United States and its allies, that is Assange's fundamental crime and the reason he is being persecuted. And on that basis, we explained that Assange's defense could not be entrusted to, certainly not the courts, the judiciary, not to the media, who, and people watching this call will understand, function as a sort of spokespeople for the government, carry out what we've labeled embedded journalism, or what has been labeled embedded journalism, repeating the talking points of the military, covering up its worst crimes. We said the defense of Assange had to be based on a massive struggle, a global struggle in the working class, who owe Assange and the revelations he was responsible for bringing to light a great deal. Now, Corbyn, as we know, came to the leadership of the Labour Party on a mass wave of support. At any stage in his leadership of the Labour Party, he could, with a word, or with a single speech, have summoned hundreds of thousands, if not more, people to the streets in defence of Assange. I mean, Assange was being left to rot in London, arbitrarily detained, psychologically tortured in the Ecuadorian embassy for most of Corbyn's tenure. He was then thrown in Belmarsh for the rest of it. Corbyn was silent all the way through up until the moment that Assange was illegally dragged from the embassy by British police. Finally, the outrage against that finally forced him to make some comment, giving some sort of nominal opposition to the treatment of Assange. Within 2 days, I think it was less, I think it was even within 1 day, the Labour Party right had launched into, I think there was an open letter, an attack on Assange, a repeat of the, at that stage, thoroughly discredited Swedish sexual assault smears, and demanded that Corbyn retract his position. Corbyn did so immediately, went on TV to say that there is no hiding from the Swedish accusations, Assange should face them. And he even went further and said that really any fate, Assange's fate vis-a-vis Sweden or the United States, was a matter for the British courts. And that was that, and it was left. Again, for a long period of months, including the entirety of the December 2019 general election. Corbyn, the word Assange did not pass Corbyn's lips. We stood candidates in that campaign. We made it one of the central elements of it, was the call for Assange's freedom. Corbyn remained utterly silent. And he now, I need to sum up, functions as a means, now that he is no longer leader, he is wheeled out at various, and not even that many. The issue is kept, Assange's fate is kept largely under wraps, but where they do organise a demonstration or a rally in opposition, Corbyn is wheeled out to frame all opposition to Assange's fate in terms of an appeal to Boris Johnson's government. In Corbyn, the thrust of Corbyn's politics is to ask Boris Johnson politely to intervene and not to extradite Assange, or to appeal to the courts to show some decency. Now, the real point of this politics, is the real point of all of Corbyn's politics, is to prevent a mobilization of the working class over any issue, but in this case over the issue of defending the most significant journalist of the, certainly of the 21st century. The questioner refers to it. Corbyn is also, of course, handed control of the Labour Party over to Sir Keir Starmer, who we know as Director of Public Prosecutions, oversaw a department which sent a message to the Swedish prosecutors, Swedish state, encouraging it, or demanding that it continued to maintain its bogus charges against Assange, to serve as a pretext for his continued detention, essentially, in the Ecuadorian embassy. Emails were sent out from the British department telling their Swedish counterparts, don't you dare get cold feet. You know, don't think that this is just another case. This means a great deal to the British state. And Starmer is now, of course, leader of the Labour Party, and ensuring that the demands of that British state, that is the extradition of Assange to the United States, are carried out. This is one of the most significant, I would say, betrayals carried out by Corbyn during his tenure as Labour Party leader.
Well, Tom, we're coming to the end of our time, and I know you've got to make some announcements at the end of the meeting, particularly with respects to the quite imminent meeting at 5 o'clock on the situation in the United States. But I'd just like to close by, if I may, read another section of our Congress resolution, because we treat Corbyn not as a minor issue, Corbyn, but as a strategic question for the British and international working class. And we've again and again tried to explain what the fundamental lessons are. And perhaps in closing this meeting, I'd like to read just 2 points from our Congress resolution. On this issue, we wrote the following: masses of people have been brought face to face with the bankruptcy and treachery of political parties that have dominated protest movements and what passed for left politics over an entire historical period. The model for Corbynism was Syriza in Greece and a host of other anti-Marxist, fake left tendencies, including the new anti-capitalist party in France, the Left Party in Germany, the Democratic Socialists of America in the US, and Podemos in Spain, which have all integrated themselves into bourgeois and imperialist politics. Rooted in affluent sections of the middle class, they insist that the working class is no longer a revolutionary force, but has been superseded by a multitude of social constituencies defined by national, racial, gender, or lifestyle identities. For decades, these parties palmed off their politics as radical or anti-capitalist when they were nothing of the sort. Their essential function on behalf of crisis-ridden capitalism is to preempt and prevent the emergence of an independent political movement of the working class for socialism. To identify and explain these parties' role, the ICFI developed the term pseudo-left. They support capitalism, oppose the class struggle, embrace philosophical irrationalism, and support neo-colonial wars. The central lesson of the failure of Corbynism was summed up in a December the 14th, 2019 statement by the WSWS editorial board on Labour's electoral debacle. Quote, "What is exposed in Labour's debacle is a type of politics that seeks to deny the revolutionary nature of the working class. Under Corbyn's leadership, Labour ditched any class appeal in favour of promoting an agenda based on the identity politics of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender and sexual orientation. The ideologist of the middle-class left, Chantal Mouffe, described Corbyn as potentially the most successful example of a new wave of left populism because he, quote, stands at the head of a great party and enjoys the support of the trade unions. The outcome would depend on his rejecting, quote, the traditional left political frontier established on the basis of class." We commented, Corbyn's debacle is the exposure not just of the Labour Party, but of the entire perspective of the parliamentary road to socialism. The great questions of war, poverty, and social inequality are not going to be solved with cleverly run election campaigns. The precondition for resolving any of the great social problems confronting mankind is a massive mobilisation of the working class and the intensification of the class struggle on a global scale. Only a movement that identifies itself with this struggle, that breaks through the miserable nationalist debate over Brexit and fights for a programme of international proletarian unity, will be able to win the confidence of the working class and lead it in the fight for socialism. I just want to conclude on this. If you agree with that, get in touch today and join this party. I'll hand over to Tom.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for your opening report and for all of your comments in response to questions today. I think it's been a very strong meeting, and I again echo that call to people who have been perhaps readers of the World Socialist website for some time, or who even have only come across us and come across the Socialist Equality Party for the first time today, are interested in and find themselves in agreement with the points of political analysis we've made today. Do make the decision today to get in touch with the Socialist Equality Party, and as well, if you can, we're a party, as you can imagine, without large financial backers. We run on the basis of donations from the working class. Make the decision today, if you support the work that we're doing, to donate to the work of the Socialist Equality Party. You can do so at the link on your screens now. Chris mentioned there in his final comment that we do have another meeting scheduled for today, quite imminently, 5 o'clock UK time. It's hard to stress enough, certainly, the significance of the events in the United States. And in relation to that, of course, it's hard to stress enough the significance of this meeting that we will be holding. The World Socialist website has a unique record in analysing, tracking and organising opposition to the efforts of Trump to build essentially a fascistic movement within the United States, and increasingly to build or establish a presidential dictatorship in the United States. We've explained the basis of this in the efforts of the most ruthless and brutal sections of the American oligarchy to remove the most basic limitations on their power in the United States, including now even the formal running of presidential elections. We have drawn attention, we have raised the historical parallels that are drawn by these events, in particular the secession of the southern slave-owning states, which marked the beginning of the American Civil War. We will be discussing those historical parallels in the meeting this evening, 5 o'clock, with two really fantastic historians who we have been in discussion with on the World Socialist website previously on other issues. They are Richard Corbyn, who was a lecturer at Sheffield University and at Oxford University, where he was served the Rhodes Chair of American History. He's the author of the Lincoln Prize-winning biography, Lincoln, A Life of Purpose and Power, and an editor of the volume, The Global Lincoln. We also have James Oakes, another very distinguished professor of history at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He is a two-time Lincoln Prize winner for his books, The Radical and the Republican, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, and the Triumph of Anti-Slavery Politics, and for Freedom National, The Destruction of Slavery in the United States, 1861 to 1865. They'll be joined in discussion by Tom Ackerman, himself a professor of history at King's College in Pennsylvania, and a regular writer for the World Socialist website, member of the Socialist Equality Party. And finally, the discussion will be moderated by David North, the chairman of the International Editorial Board of the World Socialist website, and the writer of numerous books in defense of Marxist theory, Marxist history, and Marxist politics, many of which you will find on bearingbooks.co.uk. I think everyone on this call recognizes the immense significance of the events in America and the necessity, we hope, of the working class developing its own political response to these events. There is nowhere outside of this meeting that you will hear the sort of profound theoretical, political base, historically informed basis for such a political fight. So I encourage everyone to make the time this evening, 5 o'clock, to attend that meeting. I want to thank you all very much for attending today's discussion. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you in future meetings of the Socialist Equality Party very soon. Thank you.